The room was dimly lit, the soft hum of music vibrating through my chest as it echoed in my ears. I stood close to my husband, yet in that moment, he felt like a stranger. Something was off. My gut twisted with a low unease, a silent warning whispering in my mind, urging me to leave. The moment we stepped inside, something inside me tightened. The air was thick, not just with the heavy scent of expensive cologne and burning cigars, but with something heavier, something invisible, yet suffocating. It was as though I had crossed into a world not meant for me, a world where the rules were different, where danger lingered beneath polished smiles and whispered conversations. I clutched my husband's arm a little tighter. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, as if speaking too loudly would disturb the very atmosphere itself. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the dim light, a reassuring smile playing on his lips. "Relax, it's just a party," he said, pressing a soft kiss to my temple. "You'll love it." But I didn't. The people inside were elegant, well-dressed, and seemingly ordinary. But they were unlike anyone I'd ever met. Their laughter felt rehearsed, their gazes too deliberate, lingering just a fraction too long. There was something unnatural about their ease, something unsettling in the way they looked at me. I wasn't imagining it. I could feel it in my bones. This place wasn't safe. I should have turned around then, should have listened to the cold whisper in my gut that screamed at me to run. I had known my husband for years. I had memorized the way his hands moved when he spoke, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. But the man standing beside me now felt different, distant, detached. His hand on my waist was loose, almost careless, as though I were an accessory rather than his wife. He barely looked at me, his gaze scanning the room with a strange intensity. His lips parted slightly as he locked eyes with a few men across the room. Then he did something that made my stomach plummet. He leaned in and whispered something to them. It wasn't a casual exchange. No, this was something else, something secret. One of them nodded, another smirked, and then their eyes turned to me. I froze. They weren't just looking, they were evaluating me, sizing me up the way someone might assess a meal before taking the first bite. I turned to my husband, searching for answers in his face. "Who are they?" I asked, forcing a lightness into my voice that I didn't feel. His smile was unreadable. "Friends," he replied curtly, "no names, no explanation, just friends." I felt a sudden, sickening realization that I had missed something crucial. I had walked into the middle of a story where everyone else knew the ending but me. I should have turned back, found an excuse to leave. But before I could, my husband took my hand and led me toward them. There were 4 of them. 4 sets of eyes that fixated on me with an intensity that was anything but polite. They weren't admiring me, no. This was different. This was possession. The first man stepped forward, tall, dark-haired, his voice smooth and chilling. "Finally, we get to meet," he said, his lips curling into what should have been a smile but wasn't. I glanced up at my husband, silently begging for him to step in, to introduce me properly, to break the tension, but he didn't. He let them talk to me like we were strangers. The second man, lean and sharp, tilted his head. "She looks even better in person," he remarked, his words dripping with familiarity, like he'd seen me before, discussed me long before tonight. A sickening realization began to creep over me. This wasn't a first meeting. They had been waiting for me. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile. "It's nice to meet you, too," I said, the words tasting wrong in my mouth, like I had just sealed myself into something I didn't understand. The third man, who had remained silent until now, let out a low chuckle. "She's nervous," he said, as if my discomfort was something to be enjoyed. The fourth man, the one who hadn't taken his eyes off me since I walked in, finally spoke. "She should be," he murmured. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. My body reacted instinctively, taking a half-step back, seeking the warmth of my husband's protection. But he didn't respond. He didn't reach for me. I stood there, frozen in place, alone in a sea of unfamiliar faces, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked up at my husband, searching for reassurance, a small smile, a squeeze of my fingers, a silent message that everything would be okay. But there was nothing. His face was unreadable, distant, like he had already let go. And then, in that instant, I knew. I was alone. The conversation around me blurred, the voices fading in and out as panic slowly tightened its grip around my throat. Something was happening. Something I hadn't agreed to. I wanted to speak, to ask my husband why he was acting this way, to demand an answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I smiled politely, pretending everything was fine, pretending like nothing was wrong. Because that's what you do when you're surrounded by strangers in an unfamiliar place, with a husband who suddenly feels like a stranger himself. You pretend, even when you know something is terribly, terribly wrong. Even when your body screams at you to run. Because you know, deep down, this isn't just a party. This isn't just a casual gathering. And somehow, I knew, this was only the beginning. A wall had risen between us. An invisible barrier I couldn't break. Then, as if summoned by some unseen force, a glass appeared in front of me. The man with the sharp jawline held it out, his fingers wrapped too tightly around the stem, like he wasn't offering it but demanding it. I hesitated. I didn't drink much. Never had. And everything in my body told me not to take it. But before I could refuse, my husband's hand grazed my back, his breath warm against my ear. "Come on," he murmured softly. "It's just a drink. Relax." I turned my head to look at him, searching for something, anything, that made sense. But his eyes, they weren't his anymore. Something had changed, and that was the moment I should have walked away. But I didn't. I took the glass from the man's hand and drank. The burn of the alcohol was instant, but it was more than that. Something unfamiliar spread down my throat, through my chest, and curled into my stomach like smoke, wrapping itself around my insides. A second later, the music shifted, or maybe it was just me. But the room seemed to expand while the people became more suffocatingly close. The lights blurred into soft, shifting shapes, and my limbs suddenly felt heavy, my breath slow. Too slow. And then I saw it. My husband, laughing. Not at me, but with them, like I wasn't even standing there, like I wasn't sinking, slipping into something I couldn't stop. That was when I knew. This wasn't just a drink. I tried to focus, tried to push through the fog that was closing in around me. My instinct screamed for me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. It couldn't. I turned to my husband, grabbing his arm for support. "I feel strange," I whispered, my words dragging, slow and disconnected. For just a second, I thought I saw something in his eyes. Regret, hesitation. But then it was gone, replaced by something else. He pulled his arm away and smiled, a different smile, a smile that said this was always part of the plan. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, sending a violent shudder through my spine. And then the world tilted. The voices blurred. The last thing I felt was their hands, cold and steady. My head swayed, and I tried to focus, but the world kept shifting. The music, the voices, the flickering lights, it all felt distant, like I was stuck in a dream I couldn't wake up from. I needed something to hold on to, someone. My fingers reached out instinctively for my husband's arm. But where was he? Hadn't he been standing right beside me? I had felt his warmth only moments ago. But now he was gone. I blinked, my heart pounding, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. Where was he? Panic surged through my veins, a sharp, electric current jolting me back to reality. I scanned the room, my vision blurry, my head heavy. But he was nowhere. This couldn't be happening. I had just seen him, had just felt him near me, whispering in my ear, placing that drink in my hand. Now he had vanished. I spun in a circle, gripping the edges of my dress, gasping for breath. I tried to call his name, but my throat was dry, my voice barely a whisper, lost in the sound of laughter that echoed around me. But it wasn't just any laughter. It was theirs. The four men were still there, watching me, their eyes drilling into my skin like invisible hands. Their presence loomed, suffocating, and the way they looked at me sent a shiver of terror through my body. Something was terribly wrong. I took a step back, then another, but my body felt unsteady, like I was walking on water. My breath hitched as one of them, the tallest, the one who had spoken the least, took a slow, deliberate step toward me. "Where are you going?" His voice was smooth, unhurried, as if the question wasn't meant to be answered. I need to find my husband," I managed, the words thick in my throat. A low chuckle followed. The second man, the one with the sharp jaw, exchanged a glance with the others before smirking. "Sweetheart, he left a long time ago," he said. The words hit me like a slap to the face. No, that couldn't be true. They had to be lying. But deep down, I already knew. He wasn't coming back. The air felt heavier, pressing into my chest, stealing the breath from my lungs. I needed to leave. I needed to move. But when I turned toward the door, one of them stepped in front of me. A sinking dread curled in my stomach. I turned the other way. But again, they blocked me. My skin prickled with a cold realization. I was trapped, surrounded. Their circle closed in tighter, their presence too close, their smiles carrying a darkness that churned my insides. I opened my mouth, forcing out a shaky breath. "Please, I just need to go." The third man, the one with the cold, calculating eyes, tilted his head. "Go where?" His voice was low, almost amused. I need to." My throat tightened. "Let me go." The fourth one, the silent observer, spoke up. "You're overthinking things." Overthinking? I felt like I was drowning in my own body, my mind screaming while my limbs refused to move. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was planned, and I was the only one who didn't know the rules. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out everything else. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperate to wake up, to snap out of whatever haze had overtaken me. And then a hand gripped my wrist, hard. My eyes snapped open, but before I could react, a whisper brushed against my ear. "It's too late." The room tilted again. The voices blurred, and then nothing. The first thing I noticed when I came to was the silence. It was thick, suffocating, wrong. Then came the pain, a dull, pulsing ache that spread through my body like a memory I couldn't quite grasp. My limbs felt foreign, disconnected, as though they no longer belonged to me. I tried to move. Nothing. My muscles refused to respond. My breath came in slow, uneven gasps. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. But then I opened my eyes. The world was a blur at first, shadows shifting in the dim glow of a single flickering light. The air was stale, heavy with something I couldn't name. I was on the floor, cold against my skin, grounding me in a reality I didn't want to accept. My body felt like lead, my thoughts fractured, struggling to piece themselves back together. Where was I? I tried to sit up, but the movement sent a sharp wave of pain through my spine. Every muscle screamed in protest. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, watching. I wasn't alone. A shadow moved in the corner of the room, and I forced myself to look. There he was, my husband, standing in the doorway, silent, still, watching me with eyes I no longer recognized. I wanted to scream at him, to demand an answer, to yell at him for leaving me, for betraying me. But the words caught in my throat. In that moment I realized something. He wasn't surprised to see me like this. He wasn't worried. He was waiting. I swallowed the rising panic, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" He tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. Then finally he spoke. "You should rest." Rest? My mind reeled. I felt sick, dizzy, broken. But above all, I felt rage. "Don't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Don't talk to me like that. Don't act like this is normal." He sighed, stepping forward, his movements calm, calculated. "I didn't want it to be this way," he murmured, almost too softly to hear. I stared at him, my stomach twisting. I didn't want what? My voice was shaking now. But I didn't care. To leave me there? To let them? My voice broke as the words rushed out, the reality of it all crashing over me. His eyes flickered, just for a second, with something that almost looked like guilt, regret. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that he hadn't let them do this to me, that he hadn't given me away. But then, he spoke again, and it shattered everything. It had to happen. For a moment, The room tilted again. The air rushed out of my lungs, the words hanging in the space between us. "It had to happen," he repeated, his voice eerily calm. I forced myself to sit up, my body trembling from the weight of it all. What are you saying?" I gasped. His expression didn't change. "You don't understand yet," he said, his voice unnervingly steady. "But you will." Something inside me snapped. "Understand what?" My voice rose now, fury drowning out the pain. "That you gave me to them. That you stood